All right, I'm Jason Hull, the CEO and founder of DoorGrow, the world's leading and most comprehensive coaching and consulting firm for long-term residential property management entrepreneurs. For over a decade and a half, we have brought innovative strategies and optimization to the property management industry. At DoorGrow, we have spoken to thousands of property management business owners, improving pricing, increasing profits, simplifying operations. We run the world's leading property management mastermind to help them grow. At DoorGrow, we believe good property managers can change the world, and that property management is the ultimate high trust gateway to real estate deals, relationships, and residual income. We are on a mission to transform property management business owners and their businesses. We want to transform the industry, eliminate the BS, build awareness, change perception, expand the market, and help the best property management entrepreneurs win. Now, let's get into the show. So my guest today is Brian Seidensticker, founder of Mount North Capital and Tax Sale Resources, one of the nation's top platforms, tracking over 8,000 tax sales and over 1.5 million distressed properties each year. Brian is a leading expert in tax lien and deed investing and shares how property managers can turn overlooked tax delinquent properties into major portfolio growth opportunities. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Cool. So before we get into the topic at hand, let's rewind and tell everybody, how did you get into entrepreneurism and how did you get into these businesses that you now have?
Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting story, although I'm slightly biased because I did not grow up with aspirations of being in this space or doing what I do today, although I love what I do now. I think probably the first sign of, hey, maybe the standard corporate atmosphere isn't necessarily for me came when I was still in school. Got my first internship in the aerospace industry, which is where I spent the first 10 years of my career at Honeywell, of all places, in design engineering, and thought it was exactly what I wanted to do, but I didn't know much about engineering and what was actually involved. And that is the first time that I kind of realized, okay, maybe this is not what I had in mind. It was it's odd, ironically enough, not a whole lot different than what I do today. I stared at a computer all day, and that is not what I had envisioned for engineering. I was assuming it was going to be much more hands-on and touching things. And that was probably the first time where I called it my early 20s crisis, where I was like, oh, I'm 3-4 years into this. Is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? And ultimately I decided, well, I'm this far along. Starting over was more terrifying. And so, go ahead and finish it out. I was lucky in the fact that within a year out of school, I did land what I consider a dream job and did love what I did for quite a while. I was basically what they call a systems engineer for missile defense programs, working on programs that essentially mimic weapons of other countries, and then our systems would also practice shooting them down, which all sounds really, really cool, right? And it was
Right.
cool. But my second realization came later when I kind of I went on vacation for 6 weeks, and I had a lot of anxiety about being gone that long, of how much I would be behind. And when I got back, I realized, how little I was behind. I was, basically stepped right back into it like I'd never been gone. And that was a realization for me that, I'm spending a lot of my times on a hamster wheel unknowingly. And then eventually came to the conclusion that I'm got 2 years of banging my head against the wall with government contracts, right? Anybody that's dealt with the red tape associated with that, for what equated to about 2 minutes of really cool. And those just didn't equate for me as being worth it, right? And that's not to say, I loved what I did at certain cases. The company I worked for was fantastic. It just wasn't necessarily for me. And that was where I kind of realized, okay, I got to find something else. Now, I wish I could say the next day I, gave my notice, dropped the mic, and left. That's certainly not how real life works. But I did start getting into, originally fix and flip houses.
Hmm.
And this is in 06, 07 timeframe. And ended up upside down in one of those. We were flipping properties in Montana. And I guess most people know what happened in 07, 08.
Mhm.
Luckily, it wasn't a detrimental thing. And I didn't have too many houses, but was upside down. And so got a notice of a potential tax lien on that property. Now, the odd thing is that because the way that Montana statutes are at the time, where every potential investor had to send you a certified letter, I didn't just get one notice from the county. Probably would have never thought twice about it, but I got 20, 30, 40 of these certified letters all saying roughly the same thing. And that's really what triggered me to go, what is this all about? I guess I'm a curious person by nature, and started researching, this whole tax lien certificate enigma at the time. And lo and behold, it was a whole industry. Like, there's legitimate large businesses and banks that are doing this. And that's what really steered me in the direction of shifting from a fix and flip to buying, tax liens. And that was really the introduction to the space that we do a lot in today. And so I was, I guess, a little bit on the journey of how I eventually became an entrepreneur, and how I was introduced to this space. Now, I guess there's a whole lot in between today and then, but that's kind of the origin story anyway, Jason.
Got it. Yeah, interesting background. So from aerospace, doing engineering, to real estate fix and flips, and now you're in software and technology and doing some other cool stuff. So tell us a little bit about how can this benefit property managers? Let's get into this idea.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to property managers specifically, whether they're working with investors, right, to acquire on behalf of the investor, and then they're operating the property, or they're maybe managing that portfolio themselves. I mean, really, what tax sales have two different avenues. There's tax liens, and then there's tax deeds, right? And the tax deeds are what are sold at the end of a foreclosure process for the liens that never end up getting repaid. They go through a foreclosure process, very similar to a mortgage foreclosure, although a lot longer timeline. And most of those are in areas where property managers, or I'd say a segment of property managers, you can get they're great rental options, especially if you're in the avenue of fix and rent. We work with several folks that buy properties, fix them up, and with intent to rent them. And so if you're looking for an avenue of acquiring properties, right, and it may shift here in the next couple of years, we'll see what comes to reality. But it's been an avenue of acquiring properties, for the past 10 years, where I think most people have found it to be pretty hard to find any sort of consistent deals at a smaller scale of acquiring to build that portfolio over time. That's really probably the biggest impact to those folks. Now, on the flip side, right, as a data point, I think one of the quickest ways of getting in trouble, right, is if properties that are owned outright, and we see this all the time, properties that are owned outright, you don't have that escrow account that's making sure those taxes get paid. And if people aren't paying those on their own behalf, then they can end up in a tax sale foreclosure unknowingly. Now, most people catch them, but we have seen properties that make it all the way through. And at the end of the day, you end up, essentially losing a property due to these unpaid taxes and ignoring notices over a couple of years, which seems like impossible, but it happens, right? And so it's making sure that property managers and just investors in general understand, hey, you got to keep monitoring and keep paying those property taxes even after the escrow is done and you have the property paid off.
Yeah. A lot of people get confused during the sale process and think, oh, it's all taken care of.
Yeah. Well, for so many of us, it is, right? As if you have a mortgage on your house, it's all taken care of, right? It's when that mortgage gets paid off, it's a happy day, but now you've got a few more things you've got to monitor you've never had to worry before.
Yeah, got it. So, yeah, and property managers, the savviest ones, they're building up their own portfolios, not just helping everybody else. And so they're investors too. And so this could be a nice channel or avenue for them to find some additional deals or properties. So, what do they need to know in order to get started with working with tax liens or tax deeds and finding property?
Well, I think the biggest thing to understand is really how the sales occur in your area. Every state has a slightly different process, slightly different statutes, and even within that state, counties, right, can interpret those statutes slightly differently. And so the number one thing that I always recommend is be smart, and as in talk to an attorney that is familiar with the sale process in your specific area. It's an unregulated space, meaning you don't have to have a license. There's nothing you have to do to participate. If you have got capital, you can go jump on one of the auction platforms and start buying. But that's also a quick way of maybe getting into a property you shouldn't have. And if you had spoken to an attorney that knows what they're doing, they might have advised you on many of those pit holes to avoid. And so that would be my number one recommendation, is start there. Now, if you're not quite ready, I think the next best thing, in my opinion, is I do interview attorneys in different states. And so if you don't want to pay, the attorney fees to figure some of that out, it's free on our site. You don't have to pay anything. Just go to our website and there's a resources section. You can filter down by the state that you're interested in. And if I've interviewed an attorney and asked a lot of those questions, it can be a free hour or two of that attorney's time answering those basic questions for anybody that wants to start there, right? It's a less expensive starting point.
Okay, great. What's the website address? We'll plug it right now.
tax-sale-resources.com.
tax-sale-resources.com. All right, awesome. Let me do a quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll get back into this. So many of you tell me that maintenance is probably the least enjoyable part of being a property manager and definitely the most time consuming. But what if you could cut that workload up to 85%? That's exactly what Vendaroo has achieved. They've leveraged cutting edge AI tech to handle nearly all your maintenance tasks, from initiating work orders and troubleshooting to coordinating with vendors and reporting. This AI doesn't just automate. It becomes your ideal employee, learning your preferences and executing tasks flawlessly, never needing a day off and never quitting. This frees you up to focus on the critical tasks that really move the needle for your business, whether that's refining operations, expanding your portfolio, or even just taking a well-deserved break. Over half the room at DoorGrow Live last year at our conference signed up with Vendaroo right there and then. A year later, they're not just satisfied, they're raving about how Vendaroo has transformed their business. So don't let maintenance drag you down. Step up your property management game with Vendaroo. Visit vendaroo.ai/DoorGrow today and make this your last maintenance hire you'll ever need. Okay, so let's get back into tax liens and tax deeds. Now, how could property managers start to educate their clients on this so that they can get more properties in their portfolio?
So, one, I guess a quick note, just listening to that note from Vendaroo. This is the first I've heard of it, and it sounds fantastic. So it's definitely one I'm going to check out after this. Jason. That's cool. So, sorry, I was thinking about that. How does Tax Resources help these folks?
Yeah, so property managers, one of their primary goals, what gets them access to more deals, is just being connected to more investors. They want to get more clients, and they want their existing clients that they love, that want to get into more property, help them find more property more quickly. So how can property managers start to educate their clients, these investors, on tax liens and tax deeds? What would be a good way for them to start being, self-educated enough that they could go and educate them about this so they can create more business?
Yeah, I mentioned our website with resources section, but there's I host a podcast as well called Tax Sale Insiders, where I'm interviewing industry professionals, interviewing attorneys, interviewing folks that are I'll say real and legitimate in the space. And I started that podcast because there wasn't a whole lot of real and legitimate information out there. Now, truth be told, it can be pretty. What does my wife say? If you want any assistance in going to bed at night, it's probably a good podcast to listen right before bed, because I'm interviewing attorneys, right? And it's
They're not super thrilling.
so these are not, small episodes of very high level information. It gets pretty deep, right? But for
Yeah.
anybody that is legitimately wanting to get in the space, it is outstanding.
Got it. It sounds like a good step may be to check out the podcast, see if there are, check out your website, see if there's any attorneys that maybe you've connected with in a particular market. But regardless, they need to find a local attorney, and maybe a good strategy for some of my clients listening and others would be to go find that local attorney and maybe do a little event with them. Bring your investors to the table. It could be a Zoom event, a virtual event, but bring this attorney, be the interviewer, make it a little bit more interesting. You'll have to be the interesting one, it sounds like, and interview them and ask the attorney to help you put together something that would be mutually beneficial for you, the attorney, and for the potential mutual client that you could share. So sounds like a good strategy to start getting into some of these deals.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's, well, tax sales occur nationwide, right? And there might be slightly different processes, but it's something that I'd say everybody could look into. It's not isolated to one market or another. It can be a tool utilized, right, for anybody in the space.
So so explain your services, your sites. How can, besides just doing research, how else can these facilitate what they're trying to accomplish here?
So really what tax resources is today is it's answers all the basic questions that there weren't any answers to when we first got in the space, right? This is over a decade and a half ago. But at the time, and I say simple answers, things like, when are these auctions taking place? Where are they taking place? What are the properties associated with these auctions, right? And what are the information associated with those properties? Because typically, definitely at the time and still today, what's published, right, is a list of parcel numbers. So that doesn't tell you a whole lot. Parcel numbers and tax amounts do. And so what we've done is compile that all into, I haven't gotten in trouble for this yet, but it's a Zillow style platform, right, where it's all loaded with all of that information. And so if you're after a specific asset type, which I think property managers could certainly in their area say, hey, I want to target these parts of town. I want to target these types of properties with, certain square footage and number of beds and baths, right? You can set all that criteria up, and the system will tell you, here's what's going up for sale, right, at any given moment in time. And those it seems simple, right? And that's a massive task, right? Coming from somebody that put it all together, right, and have a great team monitoring that. But it's 8,000 plus auctions a year. It's, millions of properties. And so it's a massive task. So we simplify that, right? And that's essentially, think of tax resources as, once you kind of know what you're doing in the space, right? So go do your research, talk to attorney, right? And you've got your model, right? What you're looking for, what you're looking to target. Then the platform can be all of the information for you to be successful from there. We like to call it all of the tools for knowing knowledgeable space or knowledgeable investors in the space to actually be successful. And that's really what tax resources, the platform, is. Now, it kind of dovetails into, typically, right, this is one of the issues that some investors may come up against is a very cash intensive acquisition strategy, because you have to typically have cashier's checks, right, capital on hand day of the auction. You don't have 30 days, to go close. Now, there's some states where you can put a deposit down, but in general, most of the country works under a, as is sale right then and there. I've actually even participated in auctions where they pause the auction and they won't continue until the person that won it comes down and provides their cash to purchase that asset.
Wow.
Most folks, right, you don't have millions of dollars laying around. And that's really where Mountain Earth Capital, which is the other side of the house, came about, which is working with local investors and helping provide the capital in acquiring those properties. Now, I'll stop short in saying that we're a lender. We're not a lender. This is not a lending scenario, but we can be a capital partner for folks that want to use this as an acquisition strategy and have a model that is either already successful or have a great model in mind and want to pursue it. Because we can be the capital that on the day of action and buying those assets in kind of a bridge type scenario where you have an end goal in mind. And so that's what Mountain North Capital is the access to the other major problem, right? The harder problem. We solved the easy questions and problems back in 2010, and then 2020 we solved the second half, which is the capital aspect for folks that want to participate in this acquisition strategy.
Got it. Do some get involved with lenders trying to do these deals, or hard money lenders, or?
I think I think there's probably three avenues of, well, I'll say four avenues of capital, right? And if I were to rank them in the least cost, it's, if you have cash on hand, great, right? That doesn't cost anything. If
right,
you can get a line of credit out on some other asset or assets, right? Then that's a least cost effective or least costly avenue. Hard money lenders are another one, right? Where if you've got credit available and have those hard money lenders that you can utilize, that might be one that is available. I would caution though that not all hard money lenders are aware and comfortable with tax sales, so that's something you got to work through with them. And then most folks don't have access to those, or you have access to those until you kind of max all those out, right? And then our source of capital is a very different source of capital that allows folks to continue buying when typically folks have to stop buying and run out of those other sources.
Got it. Okay, interesting. So yeah, so they've got to find the cash, they've got to find the funds to be able to do these deals, and they move quick, like real time sometimes.
Yes.
At these auctions. How do these auctions differ from like the foreclosure auctions and some of these sort of deals?
I'd say they're similar. For most folks or folks that are familiar with mortgage foreclosures, a lot of time the procedures are very similar. Now, the biggest difference is the type of title that you get at these auctions. And this is why banks don't typically touch these type of assets, because you're essentially buying a quitclaim deed. Now, that quitclaim deed comes with headaches, right? You have to potentially do some quiet title, which is probably the most common thing that you got to deal with. And you may or may not, most of the time you don't have to deal with any of the liens on the property, right? And so those are things that most people don't understand. That's also a reason why a lot of hard money lenders don't really like the space, and also a reason why banks won't touch it, right? They don't want to go through the effort of learning all of those things at the scale that we're talking, right? Because there's probably $4 to $5 billion of real estate sold like this annually, which is plenty, right, for most of the folks listening. But for banks, that's a small drop in the bucket compared to traditional real estate. And so that's one thing to keep in mind is the actual the logistics of registering for the sale, participating in the auction, right? That's all very similar, right? You underwrite properties, that's no different. The biggest difference is when it comes to underwriting the title, right? You have to keep that in mind. And that's also one of the things that Mountain North Capital provides, is we understand that and can kind of help people avoid pitfalls, because we're interested in making sure that they're successful also.
Right.
So that's the biggest difference, is just the additional underwriting involved on that front.
Got it. So maybe it would be a good first place to start would be to leverage the expertise of Mountain North Capital, go through one of these processes before you start trying to wing it on your own, perhaps.
Yes. I mean, like I said, without completely, tooting our own horn, right? As I would recommend that. Obviously I'm biased, right? But for folks that are somewhat new to the space, but at least understand real estate, understand how to manage that real estate, which majority of listeners fall into that bucket, and just want to utilize this, then Mountain North Capital can be the perfect partner to work with in that regard.
Got it. What are some of the big questions that people have when they start getting involved in this that they should be aware of?
Well, we've covered some of them already, but it's like, what are the other, I'll say, unknown unknowns, right? Of like, what should I be aware of that I haven't asked about, right? And we've touched, making sure that you speak with attorney, right? Making sure that you're actually underwriting every property. And I don't worry about this as much for tax deed buyers, because they're used to underwriting properties. On the tax lien side, there's kind of a myth out there that there's value in every tax lien sold, and that's not the case, because there's tax liens sold on worthless pieces of property. So underwrite your properties just like you would normally. Make sure that you understand the title aspect, of the property that you're acquiring and what other we call garbage you're going to have to deal with. And then just making sure that you have a valid and good exit ramp, right? Especially if we're going to partner with folks, we're not interested in the long-term hold strategy. We want to be that, hey, let's buy the property, let's get it stabilized, let's make sure the title issues are squared away, then go get normal financing, right, at a lot better rate, get us out of the way, and then you can hold it for the term of however long you want to own that rental property, right? And we've worked with several folks that are using that strategy of working with us in that short period of time. And that's, I think, if you execute that playbook, you can be very successful.
Does that cover then most of the major potential pitfalls that people fall into when you see them getting started with this?
Yes, I think if you do it the right way, you do your research right, and you don't just blindly go start buying items, then you'll be successful, right? Where people typically get burned is they look at Zillow for pictures. Well, these properties are distressed, right? These are more distressed than mortgage foreclosures. You definitely need to drive by the property, because Zillow might be 10 years old and shows a nice property there. Well, in the last 3 years, when it first went delinquent, right, through the foreclosure process, it could have had a fire in the back and it's a tear down. Like, these are all things that maybe normal real estate investors don't think about, right? But that is the type of assets that you might encounter in this space. So it's just doing your research like you should, right? Or any real estate investor should.
Do these always have to be done in person? Is there a way to do any of these remotely, or is that just dependent on some markets?
So the auction platforms in attendance, typically can be done remotely. And that part of working with Mountain Earth Capital is many of the auctions where you still get great deals are live, but that's part of the services we provide is actually having bidders that attend the auctions. And so if you're, in California, for example, and you want to participate in auctions in Texas, typically you wouldn't be able to do that, but through our program you would. But on the other hand, there are almost every tax deed auction in Florida is online these days. And so if you wanted to go it alone and participate in these auctions remotely, about 70% of the country is online post-COVID. Got
it. Yeah. They just doing this on Zoom or Google Meet or?
Yeah. Well, they have platforms, auction platforms that the counties have contracted with and utilized for the sale of property. So instead of raising your paddle, you're clicking a button. I mean, the auction is executed the same, but allows really anybody to participate in them at this point.
Yeah, got it. Okay, well, that's really cool. So, let's get let's get your info. How can people reach you and reach both of these entities that you've got, and then any parting words that you have for those that are wanting to get involved in this?
Yes, I think the easiest, well, as far as the two websites for folks that want to check it out, right, tax-saleresources.com. Mentioned that earlier. On the Mountain Earth Capital side, it's mountaincapital.com. You can check that out. If you want to get in touch with me, go to tax-saleresources.com, and there's a phone number on there. Call the phone number. There's actually a real person on the other end answering it. It's not an AI agent. We haven't made that leap. I still believe that having real people on the other end is important. And just tell them, hey, I heard Brian's podcast on Jason's. Brian on Jason's podcast. I'd like to talk to him more about XYZ, and they'll get you in touch with me.
Perfect. Awesome. Cool. Well, Brian, appreciate you coming on the show. This is very interesting. I think a lot of my clients, this might crack open a new idea for them, another growth channel that they could leverage as a resource for their investors. And so I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
All right. So those of you listening, if you've ever felt stuck or stagnant and you want to take your property management business to the next level, reach out to us at doorgrow.com. Also, join our free Facebook community just for property management business owners at doorgrowclub.com. And if you would like to get the best ideas in property management, join our newsletter at doorgrow.com/subscribe. And if you found this even a little bit helpful, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on whichever platform you saw or heard this on. We'd really appreciate it. And until next time, remember, the slowest path to growth is to do it alone. So let's grow together. Bye, everyone.